The wedding was the event of the season, set against the grandeur of the Reed estate with its sprawling gardens, marble fountains, and silk-draped pavilions glowing under a late summer sun. Guests from the highest echelons of society had gathered to witness the union of Viktor Reed, heir to the multi-billion-dollar Reed Pharmaceuticals, and Camilla Langford, a socialite with impeccable pedigree and an Instagram following rivaling royalty. The ceremony was choreographed to perfection, from the string quartet's notes floating through the air to the champagne already chilled in gold-rimmed flutes. As the bride appeared at the top of the aisle in a gown of hand-stitched lace, whispers spread through the crowd like static, admiration, envy. Viktor stood waiting in a bespoke navy suit, face composed, jaw tight, his signature look of polite detachment betraying little. But then it happened. Before the vows could be exchanged, the low thrum of approaching rotors sliced through the music. Heads turned. A black helicopter, unmarked and ominously sleek, cut across the cloudless sky and began to descend, scattering rose petals, blowing veils askew, and silencing the quartet mid-note. Gasps erupted as the chopper landed on the pristine lawn beyond the aisle, a security detail already moving toward it, too slowly to prevent what came next. The side door opened, and out stepped Eliza Monroe Reed, Viktor's ex-wife. Tall, striking, and composed in a crisp white pantsuit that mocked the bridal elegance around her, Eliza didn't waver as she stepped down onto the lawn. In each hand, she held a child, twins, no more than 5. One clutched a toy dinosaur, the other a worn, blue rabbit. And both had Viktor Reed's eyes. The crowd rippled in waves of confusion, speculation, and scandal-fed glee. Phones were already out. Camilla froze mid-step, the delicate lace of her veil fluttering in the rotor wash, her face an open portrait of disbelief. Viktor paled visibly, lips parting in a silent exhale. Eliza walked toward the altar, children in tow, and stopped just before the rose-covered arch. The twins clung to her legs, wide-eyed and silent. "Viktor," Eliza said calmly, voice cutting clean through the stunned silence. "You forgot something." Viktor didn't speak. He couldn't. Because the truth, long buried under NDAs, wire transfers, and the airtight PR spin of Reed Pharmaceuticals, was standing right in front of him in miniature. 2 truths, to be exact, with his dark curls and his storm-gray eyes. The wedding was over before it began. 6 years ago, Viktor Reed and Eliza Monroe were the embodiment of a perfect couple, brilliant, beautiful, and seemingly untouchable. Their love story had captivated not only the scientific community, where Eliza was quickly rising as a respected biochemist, but also the social elite, where Viktor, the magnetic heir to Reed Pharmaceuticals, was already a formidable businessman. They met at a charity gala, drawn to each other by an instant electric connection that only intensified over the years. She brought integrity and innovation into the corporate lab spaces his father once ruled with cold efficiency, and he brought her work the funding and global platform it deserved. Together, they were more than just compatible. They were powerful. But power has its enemies, and their undoing began quietly, like a crack beneath the surface that only deepened with time. That crack's name was Julian Thomas, Viktor's best friend since prep school, his confidant, his business partner in more than one venture. Julian had always smiled too easily and stayed too long in rooms where he wasn't needed. At first, Eliza had tolerated him, even liked him. He had charm, after all, and he had known Viktor far longer than she had. But soon she began to notice things, how Julian always seemed to whisper warnings in Viktor's ear about her projects being too risky or too academic, how he undermined her in meetings with subtle jokes that no one laughed at but everyone remembered, how he never once congratulated her publicly for any of her achievements. Then came Sophie, Julian's younger sister, all wide eyes, red lips, and a perpetual sense of calculated innocence. She started as a summer intern in the lab, but quickly embedded herself deeper into Viktor's world. Eliza didn't see the threat at first. Sophie played the part of the naive assistant so well that it almost seemed genuine. Almost. But the late nights became frequent, the private meetings unavoidable, and the tension unmistakable. Viktor insisted it was nothing. Sophie was just young and eager. But Eliza knew better. She saw how Sophie looked at him. And worse, she saw how Viktor had started looking back. The unraveling came not with a bang, but with silence. Viktor became distant, and Eliza, once the sun around which he orbited, was pushed to the periphery. Her ideas were suddenly too ambitious. Her proposals were met with bureaucratic delays. One day she came home to find her access to key lab data revoked under the pretense of restructuring. And always there was Julian, always in the background, smiling that same smug smile, whispering poison into Viktor's ear. The final betrayal was a quiet one. Eliza discovered it not through confrontation, but through omission. A board meeting she wasn't invited to. A patent filed without her name on the research. A dinner party where Viktor's hand rested too long on Sophie's lower back. She said nothing at first. Then everything at once. The fight that night was volcanic. Years of trust shattered in a single evening. Viktor didn't deny it. He didn't even try. He just said, with that cool detachment he'd once reserved only for strangers, "You've changed, Eliza. You're not the woman I married." But she was. She had only finally seen who he truly was. Within weeks, their marriage ended in silence and signatures. Viktor moved on. Sophie stayed close. Julian was promoted. And Eliza vanished from public life, nursing her grief and rage in the shadows, raising the children Viktor had never acknowledged. Until the day she returned, IT happened late one evening, long after the lights in the Reed estate had dimmed and the household staff had retreated to their quarters. Viktor had been pacing the marble hallway outside his home office, restless from a string of tense meetings and a dull ache of unease he couldn't quite explain. He wasn't looking for anything when he picked up Eliza's phone from the kitchen counter. It was a subconscious act, habitual and absent-minded. The screen was still lit from a recent notification. A message. From someone named Michael. At first, he didn't think much of it. Eliza had colleagues all over the world, men and women who respected her work, who admired her intellect. But something about the tone of the message stopped him cold. It wasn't scientific. It wasn't professional. It was personal. It was intimate. I missed the way you touched my hand that night, the message read. No one has to know. Viktor stared at the words for a long time, his heartbeat thudding like a war drum in his chest. His hands tightened around the phone as he opened the thread, scrolling through message after message that suggested a secret affair, a connection built behind his back and beyond his sight. He waited for Eliza in silence, sitting in the darkened living room with the phone in one hand and a glass of scotch in the other. When she walked in hours later, smiling faintly, carrying the scent of the lab and the faintest trace of jasmine from her perfume, she didn't even have time to ask what was wrong. The fury in Viktor's eyes froze her mid-step. He said nothing at first. He simply handed her the phone. Eliza looked down at the screen and then back at him, confusion spreading across her face. What is this? She asked, her voice calm but uncertain. You tell me, Viktor replied, his voice low and clipped. How long has it been going on? I don't know who this is, Eliza said immediately, eyes wide, scanning the messages. I've never seen these before. This isn't mine. I never. Don't lie to me, he cut her off, standing now, towering over her, eyes glassy with betrayal. I trusted you, Eliza. I defended you. I let you back into this house, into my life, and this is what I get. I didn't do this, she said again, firmer now, fear rising in her chest but layered beneath disbelief. Viktor, listen to me. Someone is trying to set me up. As if on cue, the front door creaked open. Julian entered without knocking, as he always did, his face grave, his expression rehearsed. I didn't want to get involved, he began, holding a manila envelope in his hand, but I thought you should see this. Inside the envelope were photographs, grainy, dark, but damning. Eliza in a restaurant with a man who vaguely resembled the Phantom Michael, leaning close over a bottle of wine. Another photo showed her entering a hotel lobby late at night. There were timestamps. Receipts. The illusion was perfect. Viktor didn't need more. Get out, he said coldly. Eliza's mouth parted in stunned silence. Viktor, please. Someone is framing me. This isn't real. Look at the metadata, the photos, Julian. He's doing this. Don't you see? But Viktor wasn't listening. He turned away as if her presence burned him. I said get out. Her voice broke on the edge of protest. You know me. You know I would never. I don't know you at all, he snapped, his back still turned. She stood there for a long moment, eyes flicking from Viktor to Julian, who met her gaze with quiet triumph. Then, slowly, Eliza picked up her coat, turned, and walked out of the house they had built together, banished by a lie, destroyed by the one man Viktor had trusted above all others. And behind her, no one followed. Eliza sat in her car, curled up beneath an old wool coat that now served as a makeshift blanket, while the rain traced chaotic patterns down the windshield, each droplet catching the dim streetlight like a falling star. Her belongings were crammed into the back seat, some clothes, a few lab notebooks, a box of samples, and her lab coat, still faintly smelling of antiseptic and sterile air. Just days ago, she had walked the polished floors of the Reed estate, the wife of a powerful man, a respected biochemist with her own research team and an office overlooking the city. Now, she was alone in a parking lot behind a supermarket, wet, cold, betrayed, and carrying a pain that had no name. The pregnancy test wasn't planned. She'd bought it half out of habit, half out of desperation while picking up aspirin and crackers with the last few dollars she had. Her body had been exhausted. Nausea, headaches, the constant pull of fatigue, but she had attributed it to stress and survival. When the word pregnant appeared on the tiny screen, she didn't scream or cry. She just stared. The silence in the car became a wall, the kind that separates two lives, the one before, and the one that starts with a single heartbeat that isn't yours. She pressed a hand to her stomach, numb, shaking, rain still hammering the roof. Her first instinct was to call someone, anyone. But there was no one left to call. Her family had distanced themselves after her marriage. Her friends had disappeared in the wake of Viktor's influence. Her name had been dragged through quiet, whispered channels. She was the one who had cheated, the one who'd betrayed a man who had given her everything. But he hadn't given her this. This child was hers. This fragile flicker of life, growing within her, was untouched by lies, by betrayal, by Julian's calculated manipulations or Sophie's venomous charm. It was real, and it was innocent, and somehow it gave her something she hadn't felt in weeks. Purpose. She cried that night, not the sharp, broken sobs of a woman abandoned, but the slow, aching tears of someone who finally understood what she had to fight for. In the morning, with swollen eyes and a stiff neck from sleeping in the front seat, she started over. She found a tiny room above a retired librarian's garage, walls lined with dusty books and a squeaky floor, but it was dry, and it was hers. She found work in a small diagnostics lab under a different name, doing routine chemical testing that no one questioned. Every morning, she woke up before the sun and whispered to her unborn child, "We're going to be okay." She took long walks through quiet neighborhoods, planning a future where she wouldn't need Viktor, where her child would never be defined by a name that had once banished them. She no longer looked in the mirror expecting to see the glamorous woman from the society pages. That woman was gone. The one who stared back now had shadows beneath her eyes, calloused hands, and a strength that no one had ever expected from her. And as the baby began to grow, her world began to change. Her body was no longer something broken by betrayal. It was rebuilding, reclaiming. She learned to live with less, and to stand with more resolve. She stopped hoping for Viktor to call, stopped imagining apologies that would never come. Instead, she dreamed of a small home with white curtains and sunlight on the floor, of laughter that wasn't rehearsed, of a future built on honesty and quiet resilience. Viktor Reed had thrown her into the night with nothing but a lie. But she had walked into something far greater. A new life. A new beginning. One heartbeat at a time. The small cottage at the edge of town smelled faintly of lavender and old paper, and for the first time in weeks, Eliza felt something she hadn't known she missed: peace. It was there, in the warmth of mismatched quilts and tea-stained porcelain cups, that she met Eleanor Simmons. The elderly widow lived alone, tending to her garden and feeding a feral cat that never let her pet it, but always waited faithfully by her door. She had offered Eliza shelter without questions, only asking if she was in trouble and if she had eaten. When Eliza broke down and told her everything, her fall from grace, the betrayal, the pregnancy, Eleanor simply poured another cup of tea and said, "Then you'll stay as long as you need. We women have to take care of each other when the world forgets to." Eleanor didn't have much, but what she gave came without hesitation: a warm room, gentle wisdom, and a place where Eliza could begin again. Days turned into weeks, and though Eliza worked long hours at the lab, she always returned to Eleanor's kitchen, where the kettle sang like an old friend and the walls didn't feel like they were watching her. One evening, as they sat under a worn Afghan watching a documentary about birds neither of them cared about, Eleanor stood up and disappeared into her bedroom. When she returned, she handed Eliza a small velvet box with a clasp that no longer shut properly. Inside was a ring, an antique engagement piece with a pale sapphire set in delicate white gold. "I wore it for 42 years, Eleanor said softly, her eyes misty but proud. "I loved my Charles with everything I had, but this ring isn't him. And it won't help me now. You, on the other hand, have a fight ahead of you. You're going to need more than strength. You'll need proof. So sell this. Buy what you need. And make sure the truth is louder than their lies." Eliza protested at first, but Eleanor was firm. The next day she went into town, sold the ring at a reputable jeweler for far less than it was worth, and walked out with a second-hand laptop, a prepaid mobile hotspot, and a folder of receipts that she tucked away like treasure. That night, she sat at Eleanor's kitchen table, the baby quietly shifting inside her, and powered up the laptop with shaking fingers. It began slowly. She combed through every document she could recover: old lab reports, company memos, calendar backups, voicemails, and photos. She reactivated her college email address, dug up archived messages between her and Viktor from the early days, before Julian had slithered into the space between them. She remembered the meeting Julian insisted she skip, the lab files that mysteriously disappeared, the financial discrepancies she had dismissed as clerical errors. Every thread she pulled revealed more: evidence of sabotage, forged communications, emails sent under her name but never from her IP address. Sophie's name began appearing in unusual places, on lab logs, board meeting notes, even private correspondence she had no clearance to access. As Eliza dug deeper, the picture began to form with chilling clarity. Julian had orchestrated it all: her professional downfall, the fake affair, the messages from Michael, the staged photographs. Sophie had been the perfect accomplice. Her proximity to Viktor, her harmless persona, her role as the wide-eyed assistant masking the precision with which she gathered and fed back information. Together, they had constructed a false narrative designed to destroy Eliza, and Viktor had walked right into it. But now, Eliza had more than suspicion. She had files. She had metadata. She had timestamps, inconsistencies, and patterns only someone with her background could spot. Each night, she organized the data into folders labeled with dates and names, slowly assembling a digital wall of truth. She cross-referenced everything, created backups, encrypted the files, and saved them to multiple drives. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming her name, her future, and protecting the life growing inside her. Sitting at the old wooden table, the soft tap of her fingers on the keys mixing with the hum of the kettle, Eliza began to see the path forward. She wasn't broken. She wasn't lost. She was rebuilding, piece by piece, truth by truth. And this time, she was not going to be erased. The clinic was small, tucked between a pawn shop and a boarded-up laundromat, its linoleum floors scuffed and its waiting room chairs patched with duct tape. It wasn't the kind of place Eliza had ever imagined herself visiting, but when you're pregnant, uninsured, and surviving on minimum wage, options become luxuries. She sat quietly in the corner, hands resting over the gentle swell of her stomach, flipping through a battered pregnancy brochure when the sound of frustration drifted through the thin curtain that separated the nurse's station from the rest of the clinic. "You can't keep submitting these numbers," a voice snapped, low and urgent. "They don't match the trial results. These are fabricated." Eliza's body went still. She wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the name that followed made her pulse spike. "Reed Pharmaceuticals has already approved the next shipment." If we blow the whistle now, it'll come down on all of us. For a moment, the air left the room. She rose slowly and moved toward the hallway, pretending to search for the restroom. The voice behind the curtain belonged to a woman, calm but incensed. I don't care, the woman said. We're talking about vulnerable patients. These aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. They're people. Eliza waited, heart pounding, until the conversation ended. When she returned to her seat, the curtain was open, and a woman in her 30s stood there, scribbling notes onto a clipboard. She had tired eyes, a stethoscope slung around her neck, and the kind of posture that belonged to someone who carried the weight of too many people. Eliza cleared her throat gently. Excuse me, she said, her voice low, careful. You mentioned Reed Pharmaceuticals. The woman looked up, immediately guarded. Who are you? Eliza Monroe, she said after a pause. I used to work for them. The doctor's gaze sharpened. Eliza Monroe? The biochemist who... She stopped herself, then stepped aside. Come with me. Inside a cramped office behind the exam rooms, Eliza explained everything. Her work with Reed, her marriage to Viktor, the false accusations, the exile. The doctor listened, expression unreadable, until finally she extended her hand. Dr. Rebecca Torres, she said. I've been waiting for someone like you. Rebecca explained that over the past year, she had noticed serious inconsistencies in the performance reports of a new drug Reed Pharmaceuticals had been distributing to low-income clinics. The medication, approved for use in preclinical trials, was showing alarming side effects that weren't listed in the reports Reed had provided. Several patients had developed symptoms that couldn't be ignored. Neurological damage, liver issues, complications that pointed to flawed or falsified data. But when I requested full lab results, Rebecca said, leaning forward, I was sent summaries. Sanitized, perfect-looking summaries. It didn't sit right. Then I found the original blood work buried in our records, and they didn't match. Eliza stared at her, a slow realization spreading through her like ice water. Julian, she said quietly. He's behind this. He's listed as the supervisory executive on the documentation, Rebecca confirmed. But if what you're saying is true, then this goes deeper than we thought. Eliza leaned back, the pieces falling into place faster now. Julian hadn't just framed her to get her out of the company and away from Viktor. He had cleared the way to manipulate her research, twist it, dilute it, and push it into production without oversight. He had been using her name, her protocols, her credibility, to sell a lie. Rebecca stood and pulled a file from a locked drawer. These are copies of everything I've collected. I didn't know what to do with them until now. Eliza accepted the folder with trembling hands. Inside were lab results, incident reports, emails from Reed's clinical division, and most importantly, signatures that didn't match. Some were hers. Forged. We can expose this, Eliza said, a surge of energy flooding her chest. We can prove what he's done. Rebecca nodded. But we have to be smart. People have tried to go up against Reed Pharmaceuticals before. They disappear. They get silenced. Eliza looked down at her belly and then back at Rebecca. Her voice was steady, no longer uncertain or broken. Then we don't go alone. With that, a partnership formed, not out of convenience, but out of shared purpose. Two women, different lives, now bound by a single goal, to reveal the truth, to stop a conspiracy, and to bring down the empire that had destroyed so many. And this time, Eliza wasn't running. She was coming back. The night Leo and Luna were born, a storm rolled over the city, drenching the streets in silver and flooding the sky with thunder that shook the windows of the small community hospital where Eliza labored. It was not the luxurious private suite she might once have envisioned, nor was there a team of specialists or designer bassinets waiting. But there was warmth, safety, and the steady presence of two women who had become her pillars. Rebecca Torres stood at her side, guiding her through every contraction with calm precision, while Eleanor Simmons sat just outside the delivery room, knitting in nervous rhythm and praying in quiet whispers. When the cries finally filled the room, one high and piercing, the other softer and uncertain, Eliza felt the last remnants of fear melt away. The twins were small, perfect, and breathtaking. Leo, with his serious eyes and tiny clenched fists, and Luna, who blinked up at her mother as if she already knew the world had tried to crush them once and failed. Holding them in her arms, Eliza didn't weep, though tears blurred her vision. Instead, she smiled, because for the first time in over a year, something truly beautiful had been born from all the ruin. Over the next few months, between late-night feedings, medical appointments, and the relentless rhythm of newborn cries, Eliza worked. Not in a lab or a boardroom, but from Eleanor's kitchen table and Rebecca's cluttered office, drafting plans, collecting documents, making calls under a pseudonym, and using every bit of knowledge she had left. The data from the clinic, the falsified trials, the stolen patents, the forged signatures, all of it was now compiled into a case that could no longer be ignored. But instead of wasting her energy seeking revenge through a broken system, Eliza set her sights higher. She was going to build something new, something that would rise from the ashes of everything Julian and Viktor had tried to destroy. Phoenix Pharmaceuticals was born not with a press release or a gala, but with a bank loan co-signed by Eleanor's dwindling savings, a private investor connected through Rebecca's hospital network, and a mission so pure it could not be bought. Safe, transparent medicine created for healing, not profit. The logo was simple, a crimson feather over a flame, and the message was even simpler: integrity or nothing. They began in a leased office above a quiet bookstore, with second-hand equipment and a volunteer team of overworked scientists and medical professionals who had seen too much and wanted to do better. Eliza brought Leo and Luna to the office in a double stroller, their laughter echoing off bare walls between research meetings and grant calls. Her lab coat bore a new name now, one untainted by corruption, and on the wall beside the whiteboard hung a photo of the old cottage where it all began, Eleanor's sanctuary. Every day, Rebecca ran point on medical compliance and ethics while Eliza directed development, and Eleanor, now fondly called Grandma Nell by the team, managed the front desk with tea, stories, and fierce protection over anyone who entered with good intent. Phoenix didn't launch with fanfare, but word spread quickly. There was a new force in biotech, run by women who had been broken and rebuilt, who had nothing left to lose and everything left to give. And behind every trial, every product, and every signature stood Eliza Monroe, not as a victim of betrayal or exile, but as a woman reborn. Because from the fire they lit together, something greater had emerged. And in the center of it all, asleep in her arms, Luna stirred, her tiny fingers curled over Eliza's thumb, while Leo snored softly against her shoulder. They were her future. And now, she had finally built the world they deserved. The first real breakthrough at Phoenix Pharmaceuticals came just 6 months after its founding, when a small, diverse team of researchers led by Eliza and Rebecca developed a compound with the potential to revolutionize autoimmune treatment. It was precise, low risk, and most importantly, fully transparent in its testing and development. They named it Aletheia, after the Greek word for truth, a quiet defiance against the deceit Eliza had once been buried beneath. The trials were clean, the feedback overwhelming, and the data undeniable. Patients responded faster, with fewer side effects, and for the first time in years, local clinics that had once depended solely on Reed Pharmaceuticals began to shift their loyalties. Word spread quickly through the medical community, not through marketing campaigns or polished advertisements, but through doctors' mouths and patients' trust. Physicians who had long harbored doubts about Reed's integrity found in Phoenix a beacon of honesty, a company that shared its raw data, responded to questions, and made no promises it couldn't prove. Within weeks, orders for Reed's autoimmune line dropped sharply. Contracts were paused, trial extensions canceled. A few clinics even sent back unopened shipments of Reed's products, opting instead to wait for Phoenix's production to scale. Inside Reed Pharmaceuticals, the first ripples of concern turned into waves of alarm. Victor Reed sat in his corner office, floor-to-ceiling windows casting reflections of a city he thought he owned, while his executive team fumbled through excuses. Market share in certain regions was dropping. Their client physicians were asking about Phoenix. There were whispers of defecting researchers and staff, people drawn to the mysterious startup that seemed to come out of nowhere with clean ethics and groundbreaking science. He listened, silent and unreadable, until one word changed everything. Aletheia. The name meant nothing to the men in suits around him, but Victor froze. He knew that name. It had been the title of a paper Eliza once drafted but never published, something she'd mused about during a late-night conversation years ago, sitting barefoot on their kitchen counter with a glass of wine in her hand and fire in her eyes. Aletheia had been more than science to her. It had been her dream. He hadn't thought about that night in years. He hadn't let himself. But now here it was again. Victor narrowed his eyes at the projector screen. The Phoenix logo, a crimson feather curling through a flame, burning brighter than he liked. Who's behind it? He asked, tone sharp. I want a name. A meeting. Get the founder in here. His team scrambled to respond, citing legal shells, public spokespeople, and the anonymity behind Phoenix's launch. The company had been strategically quiet about its origin, pushing forward the research, not the personality. There were no interviews, no profiles, no easily accessible photos. Whoever was running Phoenix had gone to great lengths to stay out of the spotlight. Victor stood, restless now, his mind sharpening into focus. Find them, he said coldly. Set up a meeting. I want to know who had the nerve to come for my territory. He didn't know. Not yet. That the woman he had cast out into the rain was now the invisible force dismantling everything he had built. And Eliza, watching the numbers climb from her modest office in Phoenix's headquarters, knew it wouldn't be long before he came knocking. She was ready. The date was chosen with meticulous care, April 14th, a spring afternoon drenched in florals and wealth, with every detail curated to project the image of triumph and new beginnings. Victor Reed and Sophie Thomas were to be married at the same private estate where, 2 years earlier to the day, Eliza Monroe had been cast out under a storm-black sky, her reputation in shreds and her marriage destroyed. Invitations were sent in gold-embossed envelopes. The guest list carefully selected to include the city's elite, the powerful allies of Reed Pharmaceuticals, and media outlets eager for a spectacle. What no one spoke aloud, but everyone whispered, was that the date was not coincidental. Sophie had insisted on it, April 14th, the anniversary of Eliza's fall, now reborn as Sophie's coronation. The estate had been transformed into a vision of opulence. White roses hung from crystal arches, champagne flowed from marble fountains, and a string quartet played delicate melodies beneath silk-draped canopies. Sophie walked among the guests in a gown designed to mirror royalty, her every step rehearsed, her smile a weapon. Victor, ever the polished figurehead, wore his family legacy like armor, his jaw tight and his expression unreadable. The ceremony was moments from beginning when the silence broke, not with music, but with the sound of a car door closing on the gravel drive just beyond the entrance. Heads turned. At the end of the stone walkway stood a woman, upright and calm, dressed in a sleek black suit that contrasted sharply with the pastels around her. Her presence was magnetic. She didn't raise her voice or demand attention. She didn't need to. Her eyes swept the crowd once, then fell on Viktor. And beside her stood two children. A boy and a girl, both around 2 years old, dressed neatly, their small hands resting in hers. The boy had Viktor's storm gray eyes and his father's unmistakable profile. The girl, softer in expression, blinked up at the unfamiliar crowd with quiet curiosity. Murmurs rippled through the guests. Several phones lifted. One of the reporters at the edge of the tent raised his camera, sensing the moment before it erupted. Viktor turned, and for a single instant, everything stopped. Eliza didn't flinch. She walked forward slowly, not to cause a scene, not to scream or accuse. She had done all of that in her past life, and it had nearly destroyed her. This wasn't vengeance. This was revelation. She stopped just before the floral archway, her gaze locked with Viktor's, and then down at the children. "These are your children," she said softly, clearly, her voice carrying across the hushed courtyard. The words sliced through the curated perfection like a blade. Viktor's face drained of color. Sophie, just behind him, visibly recoiled. Laughter and conversations died mid-sentence. All around them, the illusion shattered. Eliza didn't stay long. She didn't need to. She turned without another word, gently guiding Leo and Luna back toward the waiting car, leaving in her wake a silence heavier than thunder. The date that had once been chosen as a cruel symbol of erasure had been reclaimed. And the truth, now walking on two tiny pairs of feet, could no longer be ignored. Viktor stood frozen beneath the arch of white roses, his hands still clasped loosely around Sophie's, the string quartet's final note trailing off into an unnatural silence that gripped the entire courtyard. Eliza's voice had landed like a stone in still water, the ripples of shock widening with every second of silence that followed. Guests, once sipping champagne and murmuring pleasantries, now turned in stunned unison toward the woman in black and the two children standing calmly at her side. "These are your children," Eliza repeated, her voice calm but unwavering, not raised in accusation, not dipped in anger, only truth, clean and undeniable. "Leo. Luna. Born 1 year, 11 months, and 14 days ago." Viktor took a step forward, his mouth parting to speak, but no words came. His eyes locked with the boys, gray, unmistakable, and then with the girls, whose gaze held his with the quiet gravity only a child unaware of her own significance could manage. The resemblance was too precise to be coincidence. The shape of their faces, the color of their eyes, the curl of Luna's dark hair that matched his mother's, but with a glint of Viktor's own childhood photographs. He blinked, as if doing so would change what stood before him. Eliza stepped forward, unzipping a slim leather portfolio she carried beneath her arm. "You were lied to," she said, directing the words to Viktor alone, though she knew the entire crowd was hanging on every syllable. "You believed what Julian showed you. The messages. The photos. The story about an affair with a man named Michael. But none of it was real." She opened the folder and handed him a printed sheet. "These are the original data logs from your company's security server, which Julian thought he deleted. Timestamps prove the so-called messages from my phone were sent from a proxy server, using an IP address registered to his name." She handed him another document. "These are internal communications from Reed's clinical division, showing drug trial falsifications under his authorization. He was using my credentials, Viktor. My name, my research. The same day he accused me of betrayal, he filed a patent under a shell company with Sophie as its co-signer." Sophie gasped, her face whitening as she instinctively pulled her hand from Viktor's. Julian, standing near the first row of guests, took a full step back, his composure slipping for the first time in years. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. Names were being whispered now, connections remembered. Journalists lowered their cameras for a moment, stunned. Eliza looked at them both, Julian, whose mask of control was beginning to crack, and Sophie, who seemed to shrink beneath the weight of her unraveling performance, and then turned back to Viktor. "You threw me out on the word of a man who envied your position," she said quietly. "And a woman who wanted it. You believed them without question. You didn't even look me in the eye." Viktor's fingers trembled as he flipped through the papers, his mind racing through memories, doubts long buried, inconsistencies that now screamed in his ears. Why didn't you come to me sooner?" Eliza's expression didn't waver. "Because you didn't want the truth then. You wanted a scapegoat. And I had children to protect." She looked down at Leo and Luna, who clung gently to her legs, quiet but steady beneath the weight of the moment. "I gave you space to do the right thing. You never came. So I brought the truth to you." Gasps and shocked murmurs swelled as guests processed the scene, the hidden children, the forged evidence, the calm dismantling of a legacy in real time. Sophie's lip quivered, and Julian turned as if considering an escape. But it was too late. The curtain had been pulled back, the illusion destroyed. Viktor slowly knelt before the twins, his hands shaking as he reached for Leo's, and then Luna's, his voice barely a whisper. "My God," he said, tears brimming in his eyes. "What have I done?" But Eliza said nothing more. She gently stepped back, lifting Luna into her arms and reaching for Leo's hand. And as the cameras began to flash and the silence turned to chaos, she turned from the altar that was never hers, walking away with her children, truth at her back and nothing left to prove. The silence that had hung over the wedding like a storm finally cracked, not with applause or ceremony, but with the sharp command of law enforcement cutting through the stunned murmurs of the crowd. Black SUVs pulled up along the estate's long gravel drive, their tinted windows reflecting the stunned faces of guests still frozen in disbelief. Men and women in dark jackets stepped out, their movements brisk, purposeful, unflinching. The gold letters on their backs were unmistakable, FBI. A murmur swept through the courtyard, followed by the high-pitched rustle of panic. Sophie turned, pale as silk, her mouth parting in shock, while Julian instinctively backed toward the catering tent as if it might swallow him whole. Two agents approached with folders and arrest warrants in hand, their voices clear, firm, and without hesitation. Julian Thomas, you're under arrest for wire fraud, corporate espionage, and the falsification of medical data under federal jurisdiction. Ms. Sophie Thomas, you're under arrest for aiding and abetting in the concealment of evidence, falsifying financial documents, and co-conspiracy in defrauding a federally regulated pharmaceutical enterprise. Gasps turned to shouts as camera phones shot into the air, capturing every angle as Julian's carefully cultivated composure cracked into pure panic. This is a mistake, he barked, struggling as cuffs locked around his wrists. You don't know who I am, Viktor, tell them. But Viktor said nothing. He stood motionless in the aisle, the bouquet still wilting in Sophie's abandoned place, his entire world unraveling with a precision he could neither stop nor deny. Sophie tried to speak, to plead, but her words dissolved into a sob as she was led away, her veil catching in the wind like a final lie torn free. The agents walked them past the guests, past the whispers and the judgment, toward the vehicles that would carry them away not just from the estate, but from the empire they had corrupted. And in the silence left behind, all eyes turned to Viktor Reed. He looked broken. He stood staring at the papers Eliza had handed him, now trembling in his hands, eyes fixed not on the empty aisle but on the two small figures watching it all from a quiet corner of the lawn. Leo and Luna stood near Eleanor and Rebecca, calm but curious, too young to understand the full weight of the moment, but old enough to feel its sharp edges in the air. Viktor's parents, Harold and Marianne Reed, moved slowly through the stunned crowd. They had watched it all from the second row. First the interruption, then the revelation, and now the collapse of everything they had trusted. Marianne clutched Harold's arm tightly as they reached the children, and for a moment, Eliza tensed instinctively, her body angled protectively. But Marianne knelt in the grass without hesitation, her hands trembling as she reached for Luna's tiny fingers. You're ours, she whispered, tears slipping freely now, her voice a strange blend of wonder and heartbreak. We didn't know. Leo looked up at Harold, who knelt beside his wife, his face drawn and weary. You have his eyes, he said hoarsely, and when he looked up at Eliza, he did not try to excuse the past. He only nodded. We failed you. All of you. Eliza didn't speak, but she didn't move away. She allowed the moment to exist, just long enough for the grandparents to see what had been taken from them, not through malice, but through blind loyalty to a son who had chosen lies over truth. Viktor finally stepped forward, his face pale, his hands empty, his expression hollowed by the weight of 6 lost years. He looked at the children and then at Eliza, and there was no speech, no plea, no grand apology, only a whisper broken by disbelief. I missed everything, he said. Their first steps, their first words. I didn't even know they were real. Eliza met his gaze, not with anger now, but with a quiet finality. You didn't want to know, she replied. You made sure of it. Viktor's shoulders sagged, and for the first time in his life, the heir to a pharmaceutical empire looked like a man who had built everything, only to watch it crumble by his own hand. And behind him, the altar remained untouched, its roses wilting in the wind, a monument to a wedding that would never be, and to a truth that refused to stay buried. The penthouse was nothing like the world Viktor Reed remembered her belonging to, sleek, glass-wrapped, and high above the chaos of the city. It exuded quiet power, precision, and restraint. Gone were the soft edges of Eliza Monroe, the understated elegance of silk dresses and vintage furniture. In their place stood steel, marble, and the curated presence of a woman who had built an empire from the ashes of betrayal. Viktor stepped inside at her invitation, guided not by an assistant, but by silence. Leo and Luna's laughter echoed faintly from a distant room, but here, in the penthouse's heart, everything was under her control. Eliza stood at the edge of the floor-to-ceiling windows, a folder in one hand, her posture composed, her expression unreadable. The skyline glittered behind her, a reflection of what she had built, Phoenix Pharmaceuticals, now valued at nearly $1 billion. With international clinical trials underway, partnerships blooming, and a reputation built not on legacy, but on transparency and innovation. Viktor's voice, when it came, was lower than usual. You did all of this. She turned slowly. Yes. Without your name. Without your money. Without your protection. He nodded, equal parts humbled and haunted. It's extraordinary. She offered a faint smile, but it held no softness. It's necessary. She gestured to the sleek glass table where 2 espresso cups sat untouched and placed the folder in front of him. Phoenix is outpacing Reed in research and credibility. You're losing your international partnerships. Your shareholders are asking questions about internal ethics and your role in the falsified data scandal. You need stability. I can offer it. Viktor opened the folder and scanned the proposal. Merger terms, equity balance, shared R&D departments, a combined foundation focused on accessible medicine. But it was clear who was leading. Eliza wasn't asking for a seat at the table. She was setting it. Viktor looked up, and for a moment, he saw in her the woman he had once loved, the woman he had once betrayed, and the mother of the children he barely knew. "Is this a peace offering?" he asked carefully. "No," Eliza said, her tone even. "It's business. I don't make peace with the past. I move forward." He studied her in silence. "And us?" "There is no us, Viktor," she replied, not cruelly, just plainly. "There's a boardroom. A shared future for our children. An empire that will outlive all of us. But the rest, you buried it when you turned away." Viktor nodded slowly, understanding settling into his bones. She had not come back to reopen old doors. She had built new ones, and he was lucky to be allowed to knock. "You'll be at the head," he said, not asking, simply acknowledging. Eliza met his gaze directly. "I already am." He smiled, quietly, with something like awe, and signed. Not because he had power over her, but because he finally understood she had more. And as he left her penthouse, her world, he knew he had shaken hands with the future. But he had lost the heart that could have shared it. The park was quiet in the early morning, the city not yet fully awake, and the air was filled with the soft sounds of leaves rustling and children's laughter drifting between the trees. Leo was chasing a squirrel with uncoordinated determination, while Luna sat cross-legged in the grass, carefully arranging leaves by color. Eliza stood nearby, coffee in hand, watching them with the quiet attentiveness of a mother who had learned to measure peace in fleeting moments. Viktor approached slowly, his footsteps cautious on the gravel path, and when Eliza turned to see him, there was no surprise on her face, only calm. He stopped a few feet away, looking not at her, but at the children. "I've been thinking about them constantly," he said quietly. "And about you. About everything." Eliza didn't speak, letting the silence stretch. "I was wrong," he continued, voice low. "About the past. About what I believed. About what I let them do to you." He turned toward her then, his eyes searching. "I know I can't undo it. But if there's a way, anyway, I want another chance. With you." Eliza looked at him for a long time. "Viktor," she said gently, "you lost that chance when you didn't even ask me if the story was true. You believed them over me without hesitation. You chose what was easy. I survived what was hard." He opened his mouth, but she lifted a hand to stop him. "I'm not angry anymore," she said. "I'm not here to punish you. But I'm not going back. Not to the past, and not to you." There was a pause as her words settled between them. Then she added, more softly, "But you can be their father. Not a visitor. Not a name. A real presence." Viktor blinked, and his breath caught. "You let me." "They deserve it," she said, glancing toward the twins, who were now building something with sticks. "They deserve to know who you are and to feel loved from every direction. That's what matters. That's what I care about." He nodded slowly, overwhelmed by the quiet mercy in her voice. "Thank you." Eliza turned to him, her expression unwavering but kind. "This isn't about forgiveness. It's about the future. Leo and Luna are the center now. Not you. Not me. Them." And with that, she stepped away, calling gently to the children, who ran to her without hesitation. Viktor knelt down to greet them, his voice shaking slightly as he said their names aloud, learning how it felt to finally speak them freely. Eliza watched from a few steps away, arms crossed but face soft. She had returned, yes, but not to the heart that once failed her. Only to the ones that never would. The backyard was strung with paper lanterns and laughter, the scent of chocolate cake and barbecue floating on the spring breeze as Leo and Luna raced across the grass in matching superhero capes, their shouts echoing off the garden walls. It had been a full year since their lives had quietly, irrevocably changed, since courtrooms were replaced with co-parenting calendars and silence with cautious conversations. Now, they turned 5 surrounded by more love than they could possibly understand, their arms full of presents, their cheeks sticky with frosting. Viktor stood beneath the shade of the old oak tree, a party hat slightly askew on his head, holding a juice box that Luna had firmly instructed him not to spill. A year ago, he wouldn't have believed it possible to be here like this, not as a guest or an outsider, but as a father, an active, welcome presence in their world. He still carried the weight of what had been lost, but it no longer crushed him. It reminded him instead of what he'd merely missed, and what he was now building. Across the yard, Eliza stood near the folding tables, helping Eleanor arrange slices of cake onto biodegradable plates while Rebecca supervised the chaos of musical chairs. Their laughter was genuine, layered with the comfort of shared battles survived. Eleanor wore a grandma-in-chief sash the twins had made with glitter glue, and Rebecca had smuggled in biodegradable glitter, despite Eliza's protests about cleanup. At one point, Leo tugged Viktor's hand and pulled him over to where Eliza stood. "Mom, Dad says he can build a treehouse like the one in the book," he said excitedly, holding up a dog-eared storybook with scribbled superheroes drawn in the margins. Eliza raised an eyebrow but smiled. "As long as he uses real nails this time," she said, and Viktor laughed, a real one, the kind that sounded like the man he might have been before ambition and fear took the wheel. Later, as the sun dipped low and fairy lights began to glow, the adults sat in mismatched lawn chairs, passing around paper plates and memories, talking about everything except the past. The kids fell asleep curled up on a picnic blanket beneath a string of paper stars, and for a while, no one moved, watching them breathe in sleep, peaceful and safe, at the center of 2 lives once torn apart. The family wasn't perfect. It had scars and sharp edges and history that could never fully be erased. But it had roots now. It had room to grow. And in the quiet glow of the lanterns, Eliza looked at Victor, not with longing or regret, but with something stronger. Acceptance. Because family, in the end, wasn't always the one you started with. It was the one you chose to build, piece by piece, after everything had burned.